Hey guys, thanks for checking back with the Carla and Crappy Show. This is a special edition. We will get to our picks for this week at some point later in the week. But there is enormous news in college sports that is happening both on Monday and we assume Tuesday or Wednesday. Carla, what the hell's going on?
We thought we could make it all the way through a season without conference realignment discussion, but apparently we can't because, what's the fun in that? It was a quiet season. Let's have some fun. Effective, in 2014, the fall of 2014, it was announced today that Maryland, the University of Maryland, will be joining the Big Ten. And it is widely assumed and speculated and pretty much convinced that Rutgers will also be joining the Big Ten, and that's the announcement that we are officially waiting for, but all indications seem to point to the same situation, joining the Big Ten in 2014. They'll both join the division of the Big Ten. Apparently, this is, not officially been released yet, but there's all the M's and the N's that we used to joke about, the division that had all the M's and N's, so they will join that division. Illinois gets kicked out and moved over to their Western compadres. We
call that the pork division.
The pork division, yeah, I did see that. It was what, pork and beef, yeah, something like that. Yes. But anyhow, that's the situation right now as it stands. So yet again, the Big Ten will continue to be numerically challenged, and have 14 teams. I don't know.
We need to get Jim Delaney a calculator. I think that's the first thing. That's the first thing.
Which is worse, numerically challenged conferences or geographically challenged conferences?
Well, and with this move, the Big Ten manages to be both. So there is that.
Good point.
Carla, obviously you have rooting interests in the Big Ten, and we can both get to that stuff in a minute. But I'm curious, as someone who has been in the sports writing business and covered especially college football a bit, what do you think about this? I mean, what is this going to mean for the Big Ten? What is this going to mean for the conference realignment in general as you look ahead?
Yeah. Well, I think, it's interesting. I didn't see this coming, to be perfectly honest. I'm not sure anybody saw this coming. And I hate to say this, but out of all the crazy conference realignments that have happened, this one almost makes sense. And I say almost because at least they're in bordering states.
True.
It's Maryland and Penn State. They're going to try to build that into a rivalry. I don't see that necessarily happening. But at least they're geographically close. Maryland fans could actually travel to State College. Rutgers fans could very easily travel to State College. Even some of the Ohio schools. It would be a long trip, but it's still drivable in theory. So that does kind of make a little bit of sense. Quality-wise, I don't think you're getting a lot. I think this was more of a money grab by both Maryland and Rutgers. I'll be interested in hearing from Delaney when it's all official and said and done. As to why the invites were extended, because, like we said, we didn't see the Big Ten going for expansion anytime soon.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see what his logic was, other than the TV markets. That's what they're going to say, is that they wanted the Washington, D.C. and the New York TV markets. But do those markets really care about Maryland and Rutgers? Seriously, I'm not sure they do. So
that's one of the things that I think is the biggest fallacy here. We will hear at some point that this is driven by the Big Ten network and access to huge TV markets in D.C. and New York City. I wonder. I suppose it doesn't matter. I suppose the important thing to the conference is just to have the Big Ten network in those homes, and they don't actually care what the viewership numbers are, and that's probably a good thing because D.C. is a pro sports town. New York City is a pro sports town. I don't think they care a whole lot about college sports or college football in particular in either place. But in the end, it may just be having a Big Ten network in those homes is what makes a difference.
And if you look at the teams that haven't been gobbled up by a mega conference that's starting to form, I hate to say that Rutgers and Maryland were two of the better teams left on the table, even though they weren't technically on the table. But I think if you were going to snag somebody, Rutgers, do you snag Rutgers? Do you snag Louisville? Talking about down the road. What does this do to Louisville? I hate to keep saying this. I said this at the beginning of the season. I keep hoping the Big 12 comes knocking because I think that's a good fit for them. But at this point, they don't have a partner team anymore to go to the Big 12, so I'm not sure how that works. And I don't see Louisville going to the ACC, but now there's a vacancy with Maryland. So, it's kind of interesting to see. I think Louisville is going to be the next card, to fall in this conference realignment. I think they're just the next school that will be picked up by somebody. But where that is, your guess is as good as mine at this point.
Okay. The other fallacy that I see, before I get to my feelings about this as someone who's been a Big Ten fan for his entire life, in the Big Ten Network's coverage of this stuff this afternoon, there was mention of, gosh, now we have access to these markets for recruiting, and I thought, number one, the conference has access to those markets now, and if you take a look at the Penn State roster, you'll see Virginia, and you'll see Maryland, and you'll see New Jersey, and you'll see New York. I mean, that's Joe Paterno's gone, but that has not changed. That's an area that they have worked for decades. And it's also not ignored by the other schools. I took a quick spin through Ohio State's roster before we taped, and there's Alexander, Virginia, there's Maryland, there's a couple other Virginias, there's New Jersey. This is another fallacy that we're gaining something. The conference leaders are going to tell us we're gaining this thing, and we already have it. So in that respect, I'm still baffled as to what the advantage is. I know as someone who has grown up as a Big Ten fan, I was excited about Nebraska when they announced that change. Obviously, I was excited about Penn State as well, but that's been 20 years at this point.
Scary, isn't it?
Yeah. I was excited about Nebraska. Their program matched what we've always done in the Big Ten. They have it's the same profile school. It's the same football tradition. It's a good academic fit. This is about football. Let's not kid ourselves, but that is important as well. And it's a high profile program that just I think fit really well with the conference. I'm excited to see Nebraska playing basketball in the Big Ten, and there's potential for Rutgers to make some noise there as well. But this is, the Big Ten's a football conference, and in terms of football, I don't know what we gain here. Both schools have had decent runs in the last decade, but then I think about the competition that they're facing in their respective conferences, and I'm thinking in a good year these guys are Purdue. Or Illinois, and I'm not sure we're gaining much by adding another Purdue or Illinois. I think in the short term, we could end up actually diluting what is already a fairly shaky conference recently. How do you see this as a fan?
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on that one. I mean, the first thing, obviously, that when we were talking about this, that popped into my head was the Rutgers basketball thing. But of course, that's because I have a tie to that with Mike Rice coming from Robert Morrison, now coaching Rutgers. And as we talked, he can't be happy about necessarily leaving what potential conferences they could have gone to had they gone to the ACC, had they stayed in the Big East. But on the other hand, when you look at basketball, I mean, Rutgers has had some decent runs in the last couple of years and just haven't been able to get out of that madhouse that is Madison Square Garden in the Big East tournament. You have to believe that this at least gives them a little bit better shot, if they can put together some good basketball teams, on making a run through the Big Ten tourney and at least getting a berth in the field of 68 or whatever number they decide. Is that the next thing to expand? I mean, come on.
You're asking me to do more math here.
More math, I know. I know. I'm sorry. We were communications majors for a reason. But I mean, it is. It's just. I agree with you on diluting the product. Especially this year when people are saying the Big Ten is down. And you can make that argument with both of our teams, Penn State and Ohio State, being on probation this year. I mean, who is the face of the conference? I mean, is it Nebraska? Is it Wisconsin? Is it Michigan? Really, there's no face to the conference this year because everybody just kind of pushed Ohio State aside.
Yep.
They don't exist this year. That's just the way they're treating them. But there were a couple interesting things that I did see when I was looking around. If you haven't read, and this is for everybody out there, if you haven't read Dana O'Neill's column on ESPN about the whole conference realignment and how she kind of felt that this was more of a grab by the commissioners, and this has become a power struggle between the commissioners of all the conferences, as opposed to really being about academics and the amateur status of these players, and how much this has become a money grab as opposed to college athletics, which is what it used to be. Really interesting read, definitely worth looking that up. The other thing is that makes sense that SI.com and Pete Damel grabbed today was the fact that part of the reason why Maryland is going is because it's going to be $100 million in more revenue from the Big Ten network alone.
And they really need the money.
Yeah, they do. So in that regard, it makes sense. But yeah, diluted product, not the traditions. I mean, heck, I would almost rather see, and I hate to say this, I would almost rather see Iowa State in the Big Ten as opposed to a Maryland or a Rutgers, because at least Iowa State has a built-in state rival. They have tradition around that school. If you're a Cyclone fan, you're a Cyclone fan. I mean, there's part of me would rather see somebody that has a built-in rival already, as opposed to if Maryland and Rutgers were rivals, then maybe this makes some sense. But they're not. They don't. I don't know. Yeah, I'm kind of with you on this one.
Okay.
And those stupid Maryland uniforms, they don't fit in the Big Ten.
those uniforms don't fit anywhere. I'm sorry. They can go play Oregon every week.
Yeah, I mean, Maryland fits better uniform-wise in the Pac-12 than they do in the Big Ten.
What needs to happen, we need to set up a bowl game with Maryland, Oregon, and play it in Boise on that blue field.
I love that idea.
This is what needs to happen. I have a couple questions for you. Again, I'm anxious to pick your brain as someone who's done this for a living. I am curious about the role that Notre Dame plays in what the Big Ten is doing this week. I know the Big Ten has tried with Notre Dame for years and has gotten the same answer that the ACC was willing to accept. But my guess is that Notre Dame finally committing to another conference, albeit in the haphazard fashion that they did. I'm guessing that was something that pushed the Big Ten to start talking with other schools again. What do you think?
I would guess that's probably a true statement. I don't think you'll ever get anybody to say that publicly. Nope. But just based on the fallout after the Notre Dame announcement and the way that and when that happened, I pretty much lambasted the Big Ten in their response to that.
Yes, you did.
I did, and I'm a Big Ten fan, and I went that far. Seriously, that was just. They just I can't even put it into words. Just the fact that they were like, oh well, they got what they wanted, and we didn't want them anyway, and it was just kind of like a smack in the face to Notre Dame. And okay, yeah, no. We're not Notre Dame fans by any stretch. But at the same time, it seemed really immature for people that are representing the conference, people that work for television networks that represent the conference, even though they're not conference employees, but the network is run by the conference.
Right.
It just came off as very amateurish and very unprofessional. And so, yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all if we found out that, okay, fine, Notre Dame's not going to come, then we're going to go find two teams that will.
We're going to find somebody else.
That wouldn't surprise me a lot. It probably got the ball rolling. Were these two teams Plan B, Plan C, Plan D? Who knows?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, who knows at this point? Was Louisville approached? That would be a fascinating question to ask them, because I mean, you would think they would be high on the priority list too.
I would think so. I came across, as I was reading stuff today, mentioned that when the ACC presidents voted to raise the conference's exit fee from whatever semi-reasonable number it was to $50 million. The two schools that voted against the increase were Maryland and Florida State. That has me wondering. Well, the obvious question is what happens to the Big East now? And I'm not sure. I'm confident at all of the Big East maintaining any kind of stability as a football conference moving forward. But I'm also curious about the ACC. If we're going to start a move towards some kind of super conferences where we're looking at 16 teams or more, and Florida State's got to be thinking, gosh, the SEC looks awfully attractive. what is the future? Do talk about the Big East, but I'm curious what you think about the future of the ACC as a football conference as well.
Well, I mean, ACC, other than and the Maryland folks said this today, the ACC is a Carolina-focused conference, and it's hard to argue that fact, just based on the way that they're set up. And yeah, I mean, Florida State this year. I mean, think about it even in football. I mean, they only have one loss, and nobody's talking about them because they play in the ACC, and they're kind of the forgotten decent conference out on the East Coast. I mean, nobody was really paying attention to them. Yeah, I mean, for a while this summer, when right before Notre Dame went to the ACC, there were rumblings that Florida State was going to go to the SEC because it made sense geographically, it made sense with the rivalries, it made sense with the football traditions, and then that exit fee was increased, and we're like, well, that puts the end to that rumor. And we all thought that the ACC had the potential to become one of the power conferences, and then where does that leave the Big East? I mean, the Big East is a mess. I mean, there's no other way to put it. The teams that they have joining, did they really add quality? They've spread all the way across the country now. They need to have a name swap with Conference USA pronto, because they really are Conference USA with the distance that their teams are spread out. Yeah. And the quality of that conference just... what is it? I mean, does it have an identity at this point? I mean, at least the Big Ten still kind of has an identity. The SEC definitely has an identity. Big 12 has an identity of sorts. That, you know, you're wondering now with the SEC kind of staying put, the Big Ten getting a little bit bigger. You know, is the Big 12 the next grab so that they can at least have a conference championship again? You know, it's just. You know, what happens next, what domino falls next, it's kind of hard to say at this point. But if Maryland's leaving the ACC, you have to believe that Florida State is back on the table. Because now that Maryland's been the first to go, I mean, the Seminoles would be stupid to not at least think about it and see if they could figure out a way to come up with the money. I'm sure they could. With that fan base, with that booster organization, they could figure out a way to pay that exit fee. So it'll be interesting to see.
Burt Reynolds could probably cover that. Just write the check, go, whatever.
They could probably collect a bucket at the game this weekend between Florida State and Florida.
Yes.
Like have everybody pitch in $2. You're what, halfway there? You know, I mean, really, like, who knows at this point?
This will be fun to watch, and I have the sneaking suspicion that the moves that the Big Ten are making this week will not be the last ones we hear about between now and the start of the 2013 season. And, of course, Carla and Crappy will continue to watch this, and when more stuff breaks, I think it's a good bet we will come back and talk a little bit more about what's going on. Carla, thank you very much.
Sure, thank you.
And thank you guys for joining us. Check back later in the week for this week's picks for Rival Week on the Carla and Crappy Show. We'll see you guys then.